The same day I received divorce papers citing irreconcilable differences, I drove to my best friend's house for emotional support and found my ex-husband's BMW in her driveway. When I heard them through the open window saying, "I guess we don't have to hide our relationship anymore," I didn't scream or cry. I calmly walked back to my car and began planning the most calculated response of my life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What they discovered 6 months later would leave them both speechless and desperate to undo everything they had done. I'm Meredith Eigenmann, and I'm an architect. I mention my profession because it's relevant to everything that happened next. Architects are trained to see structural flaws before buildings collapse. We notice when foundations are compromised, when load-bearing walls are weakened, when something that looks solid on the surface is actually moments away from crumbling. I should have applied those same analytical skills to my marriage. It was a Thursday afternoon in October when everything I thought I knew about my life came crashing down in the span of 30 minutes. I had just finished presenting a sustainable housing proposal to the City Planning Committee, a project I'd been working on for 8 months that could revolutionize affordable housing in our community. I was riding high on professional success, thinking about how I'd celebrate with my husband Sebastian and my best friend Andrea that evening. The universe, it seems, had other plans. I arrived home to find a manila envelope wedged between my front door and the frame. No delivery signature required, no postmark, just my name written in block letters across the front. Inside were divorce papers, filed by Sebastian Hoff, citing irreconcilable differences and requesting an equitable division of assets. The papers were dated 3 days earlier, 3 days he had been planning to end our 7-year marriage, and I had been completely oblivious. I stood in my foyer, the one we had renovated together last spring, where Sebastian had insisted on imported Italian marble because only the best for my brilliant wife, reading through legal terminology that reduced our entire relationship to a series of asset distributions and custody arrangements. We didn't have children, which the papers noted would simplify proceedings considerably. Simplify proceedings, as if 7 years of shared dreams, inside jokes and Sunday morning coffee rituals could be simplified into legal checkboxes. My first instinct wasn't anger, it was confusion. We had talked about going to couples therapy just last month. We had booked a vacation to Portugal for December. Sebastian had been working late more often, sure, but he was an investment banker. Long hours came with the territory. I thought we were going through a rough patch, not heading toward divorce court. My second instinct was to call Andrea Berkeley, my best friend since college architecture school. Andrea was the person I called when I got my first major contract, when my father had his heart attack, when I needed someone to talk me through every major decision of my adult life. She would help me make sense of this, help me figure out what I had missed, what signs I had ignored. I grabbed my keys and drove to her house in Riverside Heights, a 15-minute drive that felt like an hour. My mind was racing through the past few months, analyzing every conversation with Sebastian, every canceled dinner, every night he came home exhausted and went straight to bed. Had there been signs? Had I been too focused on my career to notice my marriage falling apart? Andrea lived in a beautiful craftsman bungalow that she had restored herself. We had actually worked on the renovation together during our final year of graduate school. She had always been the friend who could fix anything, who had solutions for every problem, who made everything better just by listening. I turned onto her street, already mentally rehearsing how I would tell her about the papers, already imagining her indignant reaction on my behalf. Andrea had never particularly liked Sebastian, though she had been polite about it. She always said he was too smooth, too perfect for someone as genuine as me. Maybe she would have insights I had missed. That's when I saw it. Sebastian's metallic gray BMW was parked in Andrea's driveway. I stopped my car in the middle of the street, staring at that familiar license plate, Hoff MN1, a vanity plate he had gotten when he made partner at his firm. For a moment I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was there for the same reason I was. Maybe he wanted to talk to Andrea about the divorce. Maybe he was asking for her help in explaining his decision to me. But even as these thoughts crossed my mind, I knew they were desperate attempts to avoid the obvious conclusion. I parked across the street and sat for a moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel. The rational part of my brain, the architect part, was already assembling the pieces, seeing the pattern, understanding the structural failure that had been happening right under my nose. I got out of my car and walked slowly toward the house. The October air was crisp, and the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Andrea's front yard. Everything looked normal, peaceful even. The kind of suburban scene that belonged in a home improvement magazine. As I approached the front porch, I could hear voices coming from inside. The windows were open to let in the fall breeze, and their conversation drifted out clearly. "I can't believe we finally did it," Andrea's voice filled with relief and something else, excitement. "I know," Sebastian replied. "I was starting to think we'd have to keep sneaking around forever." "How do you think she'll take it?" Andrea asked. "Honestly, I think she'll be relieved. We haven't been happy for months. She's been so buried in work, I don't think she even noticed we were growing apart." "Still," Andrea said, and I could hear the sound of glasses clinking. Were they toasting? "I feel terrible about the timing. Right after her big presentation and everything." "The timing was never going to be perfect," Sebastian said. "But now that the papers are filed, I guess we don't have to hide our relationship anymore." I stood frozen on the porch steps, those words echoing in my head. We don't have to hide our relationship anymore. My husband and my best friend. The two people I trusted most in the world had been conducting an affair behind my back, planning my divorce, discussing my emotions and reactions, like I was some obstacle to be managed rather than a human being whose life they were destroying. In that moment, standing on Andrea's porch with divorce papers in my purse and their betrayal ringing in my ears, I felt something click inside me. It wasn't rage that would come later. It wasn't heartbreak. I was still too shocked for that. It was something colder, more calculating. It was the same feeling I got when I looked at a building's blueprints and spotted a fundamental design flaw that everyone else had missed. I turned around and walked back to my car, my steps measured and deliberate. As I drove away from Andrea's house, I wasn't thinking about confronting them or demanding explanations or falling apart in dramatic fashion. I was thinking like an architect who had just discovered that the foundation of her life had been compromised from the beginning, and who now had the opportunity to build something entirely new, something stronger, something that belonged only to her. The old Meredith would have stormed into that house, demanding answers. The old Meredith would have called them both sobbing, begging them to explain how this could have happened. But the woman driving away from Riverside Heights that evening wasn't the old Meredith anymore. She was someone new, someone who understood that the best response to betrayal isn't emotional, it's architectural. And I was about to design the most beautiful comeback of my life. To understand how devastating this betrayal was, you need to know what my life looked like before that Thursday afternoon in October. From the outside, I had everything a 32-year-old woman could want. I was a senior architect at Clemens & Associates, one of the most prestigious firms in the city, specializing in sustainable residential design. My portfolio included award-winning eco-friendly housing developments and a community center that had been featured in Architectural Digest. Sebastian and I lived in a stunning mid-century modern home in the Hillcrest district that we had renovated together over 3 years. I had redesigned the entire floor plan, opening up the living spaces and adding floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded the interior with natural light. Sebastian had handled the financial side, securing permits and managing contractors with the same precision he brought to his investment portfolios. We were the couple that other couples envied, successful, attractive, seemingly perfect partners who complemented each other's strengths. Our social circle revolved around dinner parties, where Sebastian would charm everyone with stories from the financial world while I discussed my latest projects. We traveled to architectural meccas like Barcelona and Copenhagen, where I would sketch buildings while he handled the logistics and reservations. We had season tickets to the symphony, memberships at the country club, and a 5-year plan that included buying a vacation home in Napa Valley. On paper, we were living the American dream. I had met Sebastian 7 years earlier at a charity gala for affordable housing initiatives. I was there representing my firm's pro bono work, wearing a simple black dress and feeling slightly out of place among the city's elite. Sebastian was there as a sponsor, having donated a significant sum to the cause. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He approached me during the silent auction, asking intelligent questions about sustainable building practices that showed he had actually done his research. Most people at these events just write checks and feel good about themselves, he had said, his smile genuine and warm. But you're actually changing lives with your work. That's remarkable. I was charmed by his attention, flattered that someone of his caliber was interested in both my work and me personally. Sebastian was everything I thought I wanted: successful, stable, supportive of my career. He never made me feel like I had to choose between professional ambition and personal happiness. During our courtship, he would surprise me with visits to architectural sites around the region. He learned about Frank Lloyd Wright and Louis Kahn, just so he could discuss my interests intelligently. When I was stressed about a particularly challenging project, he would cook dinner and let me vent about demanding clients or impossible deadlines without offering unsolicited advice or trying to fix my problems. Our wedding was elegant but not ostentatious, a ceremony at the Botanical Gardens followed by a reception for 150 guests. Andrea had been my maid of honor, of course wearing a sage green dress that complemented my vintage-inspired gown. In the photos from that day, we all looked so happy, so full of hope for the future. The early years of our marriage felt like a perfect partnership. Sebastian supported my decision to pursue LEED certification, even when it meant I traveled frequently for training and conferences. When I wanted to take on more challenging commercial projects, he encouraged me to negotiate for better positions and higher salaries. He seemed genuinely proud of my accomplishments, introducing me at social events as my brilliant architect wife, rather than just my wife. We fell into comfortable routines that felt mature and sophisticated. Saturday mornings at the farmers market, where Sebastian would chat with vendors while I selected fresh ingredients for weekend cooking experiments. Sunday afternoons working in our garden, I designed the landscape layout while he handled the physical labor of planting and maintenance. Weeknight dinners where we shared details about our respective days, offering advice and support for each other's professional challenges. Sebastian was methodical in the way he showed affection: fresh flowers every Friday, remembering important client meetings, and asking about their outcomes, planning surprise weekend getaways to places he knew I'd find architecturally interesting. He wasn't the most romantic man in the world, but he was reliable, considerate, and seemed committed to building a life together. I thought we had the kind of marriage that would weather any storm. We had survived the stress of my father's death 3 years ago, when I was too grief-stricken to work for weeks. Sebastian handled all the funeral arrangements and convinced my firm to give me extended leave without penalty. We had navigated the challenges of my most demanding project, a mixed-use development that required 18-month construction oversight and tested every limit of my patience and skill. Even our disagreements felt healthy and productive. Sebastian preferred traditional investments while I wanted to put money into renewable energy stocks. He liked expensive restaurants while I preferred cooking at home. He wanted to vacation at luxury resorts while I preferred exploring cities with interesting architecture. But we always found compromises that satisfied both of us. Looking back now, I realize I had confused compatibility with love, stability with passion. Our relationship worked on a practical level. We both contributed financially. We both maintained the household. We both respected each other's careers and independence. But somewhere along the way, I had stopped noticing whether we actually made each other happy or just made each other's lives easier. Sebastian's work schedule had become increasingly demanding over the past year, with frequent late nights and weekend conference calls. He explained that his firm was expanding their international operations, requiring more travel and longer hours. I was sympathetic because my own career had similar demands. Architectural deadlines don't accommodate personal schedules, and I often worked evenings and weekends to meet client expectations. We had started living parallel lives without really noticing the distance growing between us. Separate morning routines as we both rushed to different offices. Quick texts during the day instead of actual conversations. Evenings spent on our respective laptops, handling work that had spilled over from business hours. Sex had become infrequent and perfunctory, scheduled around our busy calendars rather than emerging from genuine desire. But I had assumed this was normal, the natural evolution of a long-term relationship between two ambitious professionals. I thought we were mature enough to prioritize our careers during demanding periods, secure enough in our commitment to weather temporary disconnection. I never imagined that Sebastian's late nights weren't spent at the office, and I never suspected that my best friend Andrea was the reason he seemed so distracted and distant. The perfect life I thought we had built together was actually a beautiful facade covering a foundation that had been rotting from within, and I had been too trusting, too busy, too confident in what we had to notice the structural damage until it was too late. My friendship with Andrea Berkeley went back 12 years, to our first day of graduate school at the University of Pennsylvania's architecture program. We were both nervous transplants from smaller cities. I had come from a modest town in Ohio, while she had grown up in rural Vermont. In a program filled with confident urbanites who seemed to speak fluent design theory from day one, Andrea and I naturally gravitated toward each other as the outsiders trying to prove we belonged. Andrea was everything I wasn't, effortlessly cool, socially intuitive, and blessed with the kind of natural charisma that made professors remember her name and classmates seek her approval. She had striking auburn hair that she wore in perfectly tousled waves, a wardrobe that somehow looked both expensive and casual, and the ability to walk into any room and immediately become its center of gravity. I was the studious one, the perfectionist who stayed late in the studio, refining details while others went out for drinks. My design aesthetic was clean and functional, influenced by Scandinavian minimalism and sustainable building practices. Andrea's work was bold and artistic, full of unexpected angles and dramatic lighting effects that photographed beautifully for portfolio presentations. Despite our differences, we became inseparable during those intense graduate school years. We pulled all-nighters together, survived brutal design critiques side by side, and celebrated each other's successes genuinely. When I won the Departmental Sustainability Award, Andrea threw me a surprise party. When she was selected for a prestigious summer internship in Barcelona, I helped her prepare for the interview and celebrated like it was my own victory. Our friendship felt balanced and supportive. I helped Andrea with the technical aspects of structural engineering and building codes, areas where her artistic vision sometimes clashed with practical requirements. She helped me develop confidence in presenting my ideas, teaching me how to sell my designs with passion, rather than just technical competence. After graduation, we both found positions at respected firms in the same city, I at Clemens & Associates, and Andrea at a boutique studio specializing in high-end residential projects. We maintained our close friendship even as our careers took different trajectories. We had standing dinner dates every other Wednesday, weekend coffee meetings to discuss our latest projects, and an annual girls' trip to visit architectural sites in different cities. Andrea was the friend I called when I needed honest feedback about design decisions, relationship advice, or just someone to vent to about difficult clients. She was my confidant during the early stages of dating Sebastian, the person who helped me pick out my wedding dress, and the only friend I trusted with spare keys to my house for emergencies. But looking back now, I can see patterns in our friendship that should have raised red flags, subtle dynamics that I had interpreted as harmless quirks rather than warning signs of deeper character issues. Andrea had a way of inserting herself into my relationships that I had always attributed to her caring nature. When I started dating Marcus during our second year of grad school, Andrea would frequently join us for what were supposed to be romantic dinners, turning couples' activities into group events. She claimed she was just being supportive, helping me navigate my first serious relationship, but Marcus eventually told me he felt like he was dating both of us. When I met David, a fellow architect at a conference during my first year at Clemens & Associates, Andrea immediately wanted to know everything about him. She insisted on meeting him right away, questioning his career prospects and relationship history in ways that felt more like jealousy than protective concern. The relationship fizzled out after a few months, partly because David said he felt like he was constantly being evaluated by my intimidating best friend. With Sebastian, the pattern was more subtle but ultimately more destructive. Initially, Andrea seemed skeptical of him, making comments about his too-perfect personality and questioning whether someone in finance could really understand my creative passions. But gradually, her attitude shifted to what seemed like grudging acceptance, then apparent approval. She started asking more questions about Sebastian's work, his interests, his background. She wanted to know about his family, his college experiences, his investment philosophy. I was thrilled that my best friend was finally warming up to the man I was falling in love with, so I shared freely, thinking her curiosity showed she was making an effort to accept him for my sake. Andrea began joining us for dinner parties and social events more frequently. She would arrive early to help me prepare, staying late to help clean up, extending every shared activity into longer periods of time spent together. Sebastian seemed to enjoy her company, laughing at her jokes and engaging in conversations about topics I hadn't known he was interested in discussing. There were moments when I noticed an unusual dynamic between them. Inside jokes I didn't understand, conversations that seemed to pause awkwardly when I entered a room, shared looks across dinner tables that felt like private communications. But Andrea was charming with everyone, and Sebastian was naturally social, so I interpreted these moments as signs that they were developing a genuine friendship rather than evidence of inappropriate intimacy. I was actually proud that my husband and best friend got along so well. I felt lucky to have achieved the kind of social harmony that many couples struggle with. Sebastian genuinely liked my friends, and Andrea had accepted him into our circle without the territorial conflicts that can plague close female friendships when serious romantic relationships develop. When Sebastian and I got engaged, Andrea was genuinely enthusiastic about helping plan the wedding. She spent hours with me looking at venues, tasting cakes, and discussing floral arrangements. She threw me a beautiful bridal shower and gave a touching maid of honor speech about friendship, love, and the importance of having people in your life who truly understand and support your dreams. During the early years of my marriage, Andrea remained a constant presence in our lives. She would drop by unannounced with wine and takeout when Sebastian was working late, providing company and emotional support during the times I felt lonely or overwhelmed. She remembered our anniversary dates and Sebastian's birthday, often suggesting thoughtful gifts that I hadn't considered. I thought I had won the friendship lottery, a best friend who not only accepted my husband, but actively contributed to our happiness as a couple. I trusted her completely with my marriage, my secrets, and my vulnerabilities. Now I understood that Andrea's behavior hadn't been about supporting our relationship, it had been about positioning herself within it, gathering intelligence, and waiting for the right opportunity to take what she wanted. She had been studying my marriage like an architect studies blueprints, looking for structural weaknesses and points of entry, planning her approach with the same methodical patience she brought to her design projects. The realization that Sebastian and Andrea had been conducting an affair behind my back didn't hit me all at once. As I drove away from Andrea's house that Thursday evening, my mind was working through the implications with the same systematic approach I used to solve complex structural problems. The evidence was mounting, piece by piece, creating an undeniable pattern. I drove aimlessly through the city streets, needing movement and time to process what I had just discovered. The divorce papers were still in my purse, but now they felt less like a shocking betrayal and more like the inevitable conclusion of a relationship that had been compromised from the beginning. Sebastian hadn't fallen out of love with me, he had fallen in love with someone else, and that someone was the person I trusted most in the world. My phone rang as I was stopped at a red light downtown. Andrea's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment I considered not answering. But curiosity won over caution. I needed to hear what she would say, how she would handle this conversation, knowing what she knew, and assuming I didn't know it. Meredith. Her voice was bright, artificially cheerful in the way it got when she was nervous or hiding something. I was just thinking about you. How was your big presentation today? It went well, I said, keeping my voice neutral. The planning committee approved the sustainable housing proposal. That's amazing. I'm so proud of you. This project could really change how affordable housing is developed in the entire region. Her enthusiasm sounded genuine, which somehow made the betrayal feel even more surreal. How could she celebrate my professional success while simultaneously destroying my personal life? Thank you, I replied. Actually, I was wondering if you wanted to get dinner tonight. I have some news to share. There was a brief pause, just long enough to be noticeable. Oh, I'd love to, but I'm not feeling great today. I think I might be coming down with something. Rain check for tomorrow. She was lying, of course. I had just seen Sebastian's car in her driveway, had heard them discussing their relationship, and their relief about not having to hide anymore. But instead of confronting her, I found myself curious about how elaborate this deception would become. Of course, I said, feel better. Maybe we can do lunch tomorrow instead. That sounds perfect. Actually, Meredith, is everything okay? You sound a little distant. The irony of Andrea expressing concern about my emotional state while actively sabotaging my marriage was almost laughable. But I maintained my composure, recognizing this as valuable information gathering time. I'm fine, just tired from the presentation. You know how these big projects take everything out of me. I paused, then decided to test the waters. Actually, I haven't been able to reach Sebastian today. Have you heard from him at all? Another pause, longer this time. I could practically hear her mind working, calculating how to respond without revealing what she knew. No, I haven't talked to Sebastian in, probably a week or so. Maybe he's stuck in meetings. You know how busy he's been with that international expansion project. She was covering for him, providing alibis even when I hadn't asked for them. The level of coordination between them suggested this affair had been going on for much longer than a few weeks or months. They had developed systems, practiced responses, established patterns of deception that allowed them to maintain this double life, while I remained completely oblivious. You're probably right, I said. Well, I should let you rest, feel better, and I'll call you tomorrow about lunch. Sounds good. Love you, Mer. Love you too, I replied, the words feeling strange in my mouth now that I knew how hollow they were. After hanging up, I sat in my car processing the conversation. Andrea was clearly planning to maintain the facade indefinitely, probably hoping to manage both relationships until Sebastian and I were officially divorced, and enough time had passed to make their relationship appear natural rather than predatory. I drove home to the house Sebastian and I had renovated together, walking through rooms that now felt like a museum of a life that had never been as real as I thought. The kitchen where we had cooked together, the living room where we had hosted dinner parties, the bedroom where we had made plans for our future, all of it felt contaminated by the knowledge that he had been sharing intimate details of our marriage with the woman who was supposed to be my closest friend. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat at the dining room table, spreading the divorce papers out in front of me. Reading through them more carefully, I noticed details that confirmed my suspicions about the timeline of this betrayal. Sebastian had filed for irreconcilable differences rather than adultery, probably hoping to avoid the complications and public embarrassment that would come with admitting to an affair. But the financial disclosure forms showed that he had opened a new bank account 3 months ago, one that wasn't included in our joint assets. He had also taken out a life insurance policy with himself as the beneficiary rather than me, and had transferred his 401k to an account that listed a different emergency contact, not me, and not his parents. Sebastian had been planning this divorce for months, methodically protecting his assets and preparing for a life that didn't include me. The timing of the papers suggested he had been waiting for something, probably for me to complete my major project, so he wouldn't appear to be sabotaging my career along with my personal life. My phone buzzed with a text message from Sebastian. Working late again tonight, don't wait up. We'll talk this weekend. Even now, knowing that I had discovered his car at Andrea's house, knowing that the divorce papers had been delivered, he was maintaining the charade. He was probably texting me from Andrea's bedroom, lying about his whereabouts, while planning the conversation where he would pretend to want to work on our marriage before eventually revealing his decision to leave. I typed back, okay, I have some things to think about anyway. Take your time. Let him think I was still oblivious. Let both of them believe they were successfully managing this situation, controlling the narrative and the timeline. They had clearly put a lot of effort into orchestrating this betrayal, timing the divorce filing with precision, and preparing their explanations for how their relationship had developed after my marriage ended. But they had made one crucial mistake: they had underestimated me. Sebastian thought he knew me well enough to predict my reactions, to manage my emotions and responses to his carefully planned reveal. Andrea thought our friendship gave her insight into my psychological makeup, confidence that she could manipulate my feelings and maintain my trust even while destroying my life. Neither of them understood that the methodical, analytical mind that made me successful as an architect could also be applied to much more personal projects. As I sat in my dining room that evening, surrounded by the remnants of my old life, I wasn't thinking about confronting them or demanding explanations, or falling apart dramatically. I was thinking about blueprints, and foundations, and the most efficient way to demolish structures that were no longer serving their intended purpose. The most surprising thing about discovering your husband's affair with your best friend isn't the initial shock, it's the clarity that follows. As I sat at my dining room table that Thursday night, wine glass in hand and divorce papers spread before me like architectural blueprints, I felt something I hadn't expected: relief. Not relief that my marriage was over, but relief that the nagging sense of disconnection I'd been feeling for months finally had an explanation. The distance between Sebastian and me, the way conversations felt forced, the growing feeling that we were performing our relationship rather than living it, it all made sense now. I had been blaming myself for the growing gaps in our intimacy, wondering if I was too focused on work, too demanding, too independent. I had scheduled couples therapy consultations that Sebastian kept postponing, bought books about rekindling romance in long-term relationships, planned surprise date nights that felt awkward and artificial. Now I understood that I hadn't been failing at my marriage. I had been competing against an opponent I didn't know existed. My phone rang again around 9:30. Sebastian's name on the screen, probably calling from Andrea's living room to maintain his cover story about working late. "Hey," I answered, keeping my voice neutral. "Hi, sweetheart. I know I said I'd be working late, but this international deal is more complicated than we anticipated. I might not be home until after midnight." His voice had that slightly forced quality it got when he was lying, a tell I had noticed before but attributed to work stress. "That's fine," I said. "Actually, it gives me time to think about some things." "What kind of things?" A note of concern crept into his voice. I looked down at the divorce papers, at his signature already dried on documents that would dissolve our legal partnership. He was asking what I was thinking about while simultaneously filing to end our marriage without my knowledge. The audacity was almost admirable in its completeness. Work stuff mainly. The planning committee wants some revisions to the sustainable housing proposal, and I need to decide how to approach the modifications without compromising the core environmental goals. It wasn't entirely a lie. There would likely be revision requests, as there always were with municipal projects. But I was also buying time, letting Sebastian think his secret was still safe while I processed the full scope of what I had discovered. "You'll figure it out," he said, his voice warming with what sounded like genuine affection. "You always do. That's one of the things I've always admired about you, your ability to solve complex problems." The irony was staggering. Sebastian was expressing admiration for my problem-solving abilities while creating the most complex problem of my life. Did he feel guilty about the betrayal, or was this conversation just another performance in the elaborate theater of our dying marriage? "Sebastian," I said, testing his reaction, "do you think we're happy?" The pause that followed lasted just a beat too long. "What do you mean?" "I mean, are you happy with our life together? With our marriage? Sometimes I feel like we're just going through the motions, you know." Another pause. I could almost hear him calculating his response, weighing how much honesty he could afford, while still maintaining his timeline for the divorce reveal. "I think we're going through a rough patch," he said finally. "All couples do, but that doesn't mean we give up, right? We just have to work harder at connecting." He was lying to my face while divorce papers with his signature sat on the table in front of me. The level of deception was breathtaking, but what struck me most was how calm I felt hearing it. I wasn't devastated or angry. I was fascinated by the mechanics of betrayal, the elaborate systems of deception required to maintain two contradictory relationships simultaneously. "You're probably right," I said. "Maybe we should plan something special for the weekend. Just the two of us." "That sounds nice," he replied, and I could hear relief in his voice. "We could drive up to that bed and breakfast in wine country you liked." Sebastian was planning a romantic weekend getaway with me, while conducting an affair with my best friend and filing for divorce behind my back. The compartmentalization required for this level of deception suggested either sociopathic tendencies or remarkable emotional discipline. "I'll look into it," I said. Have a good rest of your evening at work. I will. Love you. Love you too. After hanging up, I sat in the quiet of our house. My house, I corrected myself, since I would presumably be keeping it according to the asset division outlined in the divorce papers, and marveled at my own emotional state. I should have been crying, screaming, calling my sister or my mother for emotional support. I should have been planning dramatic confrontations, or packing Sebastian's belongings, or booking immediate consultations with divorce attorneys. Instead, I felt the same focused calm that came over me when I was designing a particularly challenging building. When faced with complex structural problems, I didn't react emotionally. I analyzed systematically, identified the core issues, and developed comprehensive solutions. My marriage had a structural problem. It was built on a foundation of lies, and sustained by people who were actively undermining its integrity. The solution wasn't to try patching the damage or reinforcing the weakened elements. The solution was controlled demolition, followed by completely new construction. I finished my wine and gathered up the divorce papers, filing them carefully in my home office. Tomorrow I would begin the most important project of my life, designing my own future, free from people who had proven themselves unworthy of my trust. But tonight, I would sleep peacefully in the house that would soon be mine alone, dreaming of blueprints for a life built on authenticity, rather than performance, strength rather than compromise. Sebastian and Andrea thought they were controlling this situation, managing the timeline and the narrative to minimize damage to themselves. They had no idea that they had just given me the greatest gift possible, complete freedom to rebuild my life exactly as I wanted it, without their input or interference. The old Meredith would have fought for a marriage that was already over. The new Meredith was going to build something so much better than what she was losing. What Sebastian and Andrea didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that I had been unconsciously preparing for this moment for months. Not because I suspected an affair, but because I had developed a habit of contingency planning that came from years of managing complex architectural projects where Murphy's Law was always in effect. As an architect, you learn to anticipate structural failures before they happen. You design backup systems, alternative load paths, redundant support mechanisms. You never put all your faith in a single beam, a single foundation, a single point of connection. This professional paranoia had gradually extended into other areas of my life, including my finances and legal arrangements. 6 months earlier, when Sebastian had started working late more frequently, I had begun what I called my independence audit, not because I suspected betrayal, but because his increasing absence made me realize how dependent I had become on his participation in day-to-day life management. I had started taking note of which bills I paid, versus which ones he handled, which accounts were joint versus individual, which legal documents required both signatures versus mine alone. The audit had revealed some concerning gaps in my financial autonomy. Sebastian handled most of our investment accounts, our insurance policies, and our tax planning. I had been so focused on building my career that I had allowed him to manage the majority of our shared financial infrastructure. If something happened to him, an accident, a serious illness, a sudden job loss, I would have been scrambling to understand the full scope of our financial situation. So I had quietly begun establishing my own parallel systems. I opened a separate savings account at a different bank, one that received automatic transfers from my paycheck for what I told Sebastian was a professional development fund for conferences and continuing education. I researched individual health insurance options, created my own retirement account, and established business credit lines that were tied solely to my architectural consulting work. I had also begun documenting our assets more systematically, not from suspicion, but from a growing sense that I needed to understand my complete financial picture. I photographed important documents, created digital backups of account statements, and maintained my own spreadsheet tracking our shared investments and major purchases. Most importantly, I had started building what I thought of as my escape velocity portfolio, enough liquid assets to cover 6 months of expenses if I suddenly needed to support myself independently. Again, this wasn't motivated by relationship concerns, but by professional security fears. The architecture industry could be volatile, and I wanted to ensure I could survive potential job loss or economic downturns without relying on Sebastian's income. These preparations meant that when I discovered the affair and the divorce papers, I wasn't starting from a position of complete vulnerability. I had resources, I had information, and I had options that Sebastian didn't know existed. But the most valuable preparation had been psychological rather than financial. Over the past year, as Sebastian had become increasingly distant and distracted, I had gradually been reclaiming parts of my identity that I had unconsciously surrendered during our marriage. I had started taking solo trips to architectural conferences, developing professional relationships that were entirely separate from our shared social circle. I had also been reconnecting with aspects of my personality that marriage had somehow muted. I took weekend photography classes, started hiking alone in state parks, began cooking elaborate meals just for myself when Sebastian was working late. These activities had initially been ways to fill the growing empty spaces in our relationship, but they had evolved into genuine rediscovery of who I was as an individual rather than half of a couple. The irony was that Sebastian's emotional withdrawal, which I now understood was the result of his involvement with Andrea, had actually prepared me to live without him. By forcing me to become more self-reliant, more independent, more comfortable with solitude, his betrayal had inadvertently given me the tools I would need to thrive after our marriage ended. I spent that first evening after discovering the affair, conducting what I thought of as a structural assessment of my current situation. I pulled out all my financial records, reviewed my asset documentation, and calculated exactly what my post-divorce life would look like financially. The picture was surprisingly positive. My salary as a senior architect was substantial enough to support the mortgage on our house independently. My separate savings account had grown to nearly $40,000. My business consulting work provided additional income that could cover travel, entertainment, and unexpected expenses. Sebastian had been contributing more to our household expenses proportionally, but his departure wouldn't leave me struggling to maintain my standard of living. In fact, according to the asset division outlined in his divorce papers, I would retain the house, my retirement accounts, and half of our shared investments, a settlement that would actually improve my financial position compared to our current arrangement. I also realized that many of the expenses in our current lifestyle were driven by Sebastian's preferences rather than mine. The country club membership I rarely used, the expensive wine collection he had insisted on building, the luxury car payments for vehicles I had never wanted, these costs would disappear along with Sebastian, simplifying my budget considerably. By midnight, I had created a comprehensive post-divorce financial plan that proved I could not only survive independently but actually thrive. I had resources Sebastian didn't know about, professional opportunities he wasn't aware of, and most importantly, a level of self-sufficiency that would allow me to make decisions based on what I wanted rather than what I could afford. The woman Sebastian was planning to leave was much stronger, much more prepared, and much more independent than he realized, and I was about to show him exactly how much he had underestimated me. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn clarity that made everything seem sharper, more defined. I woke up early, before my alarm, with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. Sebastian's side of the bed was cold. He had come home sometime after midnight, and left again before dawn, maintaining his elaborate charade of normalcy while managing his double life. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen island with my laptop, treating this like any other complex project that required systematic planning and flawless execution. The first step was intelligence gathering. I needed to understand the full scope of what I was dealing with before taking any irreversible actions. I started by reviewing our shared calendar, looking for patterns I had missed. Sebastian's late meetings had increased dramatically over the past 4 months, always on days when I had my own evening commitments or out-of-town travel. His weekend client dinners often coincided with times when I was visiting my mother or attending professional conferences. The coordination was sophisticated, suggesting they had been planning around my schedule to maximize their time together while minimizing the risk of discovery. They weren't just having an affair, they were conducting a strategic campaign of deception that required detailed knowledge of my routines and commitments. Next, I examined our financial records more carefully. Sebastian had been more generous with personal spending lately, claiming his bonus had been larger than expected. But looking at the credit card statements, I could see charges for restaurants I had never been to, hotels during times when he claimed to be in business meetings, and purchases from jewelry stores and florists that had never resulted in gifts for me. He had been financing his relationship with Andrea, using our shared resources, while simultaneously preparing to divorce me. The audacity was breathtaking, but it was also useful information, evidence that could be relevant if the divorce proceedings became contentious. I also discovered that Sebastian had been much more secretive about his communications recently. His phone was always face down, his laptop was password protected in ways it hadn't been before, and he had started taking calls in his car or in the backyard rather than in my presence. But the most revealing discovery came from examining Andrea's social media activity. She had been posting carefully curated content that painted her as a successful independent woman, focusing on her career and personal growth. But the timestamps on her posts often coincided with times when Sebastian was supposedly working late, and her location tags sometimes matched places where Sebastian had claimed to be for business purposes. They had been hiding in plain sight, documenting their relationship through subtle social media breadcrumbs that would only be obvious to someone who knew what to look for. By 9 a.m., I had developed a comprehensive understanding of the scope and timeline of their betrayal. But understanding the problem was only the first step. Now I needed to design a response that would protect my interests while giving me maximum control over the situation. I called in sick to work, something I rarely did, and spent the day conducting what I thought of as preparation operations. I made appointments with 3 different divorce attorneys for the following week, wanting multiple perspectives on my legal options and the likely outcomes of divorce proceedings. I also contacted a private investigator, not because I needed more evidence of the affair, but because I wanted professional documentation that could be useful if Sebastian tried to claim the relationship with Andrea had begun after our separation. Most importantly, I began securing my digital assets and communications. I changed passwords on my personal accounts, backed up important files to cloud storage that Sebastian couldn't access, and documented the current state of our shared assets with photographs and screenshots. I also made copies of all our financial records, tax returns, and legal documents, storing them in a safety deposit box that I opened in my name only. If Sebastian decided to become vindictive, or tried to hide assets during the divorce proceedings, I would have comprehensive documentation of our financial situation prior to separation. But the most crucial part of my immediate planning involved timing and communication strategy. Sebastian and Andrea clearly had their own timeline for revealing their relationship, probably waiting until after our divorce was finalized to avoid the complications that would come with admitting to adultery. I decided to let them maintain that timeline while conducting my own parallel preparations. They thought they were controlling the narrative, managing my emotional responses, and minimizing damage to their reputations. But their secrecy was actually working in my favor, giving me time to prepare while they remained unaware that I knew about their betrayal. I spent Friday afternoon researching real estate values in my neighborhood, calculating the equity in our house and determining what my housing options would be post-divorce. I also began exploring professional opportunities that could increase my income and independence, consulting contracts, speaking engagements, and potential partnerships that could diversify my revenue streams. By evening, I had transformed from a woman who had been blindsided by betrayal into someone with a comprehensive action plan and multiple contingency strategies. When Sebastian came home Friday night with flowers and a suggestion that we go out to dinner, probably feeling guilty about his deception or trying to maintain the appearance of a caring husband, I smiled and agreed. Let him think he was managing the situation. Let both of them believe they were successfully orchestrating this betrayal according to their preferred timeline. I was building something much more sophisticated than they could imagine, and they wouldn't see it coming until it was too late to change course. The old Meredith would have confronted them immediately, demanding explanations and emotional closure. The new Meredith was playing a much longer, much more strategic game. The weekend that followed my discovery played out like an elaborate piece of theater, with Sebastian and me performing the roles of a couple trying to reconnect while both of us harbored completely different agendas. He suggested we drive to Mendocino for a romantic getaway, probably hoping to assuage his guilt or create positive final memories before revealing his decision to end our marriage. I agreed enthusiastically, using the trip as an opportunity to observe Sebastian's behavior more closely and test my own emotional responses to maintaining this charade. It was surprisingly easy to pretend everything was normal. Years of architectural presentations had taught me to project confidence and composure, even when dealing with hostile clients or impossible deadlines. We stayed at an upscale bed and breakfast overlooking the ocean, walked hand in hand through coastal villages, and had dinner at restaurants where Sebastian was more attentive and affectionate than he had been in months. But I could see the performance in his gestures, the calculated nature of his romantic efforts. Most tellingly, he was constantly checking his phone, claiming work emergencies that required immediate attention. At one point, I watched him step onto the hotel balcony to take a call, his voice dropping to intimate tones that were clearly not professional. When he returned, he claimed his business partner needed urgent consultation on the international expansion project. On Sunday evening, as we drove back to the city, Sebastian seemed almost melancholy. "This was really nice," he said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "We should do this more often." "We should," I agreed, wondering if he was already feeling nostalgic for our marriage while simultaneously planning to end it. Monday morning brought a return to our normal routines, but I had decided it was time to implement the next phase of my plan. I needed to create space and distance that would allow me to prepare for the eventual confrontation, while giving Sebastian and Andrea the freedom to accelerate their timeline if they chose. I had been invited to speak at a sustainable architecture conference in Portland the following month, an opportunity I had initially declined because Sebastian had expressed disappointment about my increased travel schedule. But on Monday, I called the conference organizers and accepted the speaking engagement, then booked an extended stay to visit several innovative housing projects in the Pacific Northwest. When I mentioned the trip to Sebastian that evening, his relief was barely concealed. "That sounds like a great opportunity," he said, perhaps too enthusiastically. "You should definitely go. How long would you be gone?" "About 10 days," I replied, watching his reaction carefully. "I know it's a long time, but this could really raise my profile in the sustainable design community." "Don't worry about me," he said quickly. "I'll probably be buried in work anyway." The timing actually works out perfectly. Perfect timing for what, I wondered? For moving his relationship with Andrea into our shared spaces, for having conversations about their future without worrying about my unexpected return. I spent the next 2 weeks making elaborate preparations for the Portland trip, but I also began implementing a more subtle strategy of gradual withdrawal from our shared social life. I declined invitations to dinner parties where Andrea would be present, claiming work deadlines and professional commitments. I started spending more evenings at the office or meeting with clients, creating distance that would make my eventual absence feel like a natural progression rather than a sudden change. Most importantly, I began documenting Sebastian's behavior more systematically. I noted the times he claimed to be working late, the days when he took mysterious phone calls, the weekends when he suggested I visit my mother or spend time with friends. The pattern of his deceptions became clearer with careful observation. He was creating opportunities for extended time with Andrea while maintaining plausible cover stories. I also started testing his reactions to casual mentions of Andrea. When I mentioned that she had seemed distant lately, Sebastian was quick to offer explanations. She was stressed about a major project, dealing with family issues, going through a difficult period. His knowledge of her emotional state and personal circumstances was suspiciously detailed for someone who claimed to interact with her only occasionally. The most revealing test came when I suggested inviting Andrea to join us for dinner before my Portland trip. Sebastian's immediate response was that she was too busy with work and probably wouldn't be available on short notice. When I offered to call her directly, he quickly suggested we wait until after my return, claiming he wanted to have me to himself for our last few evenings together. By the time I left for Portland, I had confirmed beyond any doubt that Sebastian and Andrea were actively coordinating their schedules around my movements and working together to maintain their secret relationship. But what they didn't know was that my trip to Portland was only partially about professional development. I had also scheduled meetings with divorce attorneys in Oregon, researched housing markets in cities where I had no personal history, and begun exploring the possibility of relocating my architectural practice to a place where I could start completely fresh. The conference would provide perfect cover for conducting interviews with potential employers, viewing properties and establishing connections in a new city, all while Sebastian and Andrea believed I was simply advancing my career. When I returned from Portland, I would have options they couldn't imagine, and resources they didn't know existed. The woman who left for Oregon was still playing the role of unsuspecting wife. The woman who would return would be someone entirely different, someone who had already begun building a new life and was ready to demolish the old one. Portland exceeded my expectations in every possible way. The Sustainable Architecture Conference was professionally invigorating, but more importantly, the city itself felt like a revelation. The innovative housing projects I toured, the collaborative design studios, the emphasis on environmental responsibility, everything aligned with values I had been compromising in my current position. But the real breakthrough came during my extended stay, when I met Emily Clemens, no relation to my current firm, despite the shared surname. Emily was the principal architect at a boutique sustainable design company that specialized in affordable housing initiatives across the Pacific Northwest. We connected immediately over coffee after my conference presentation, discussing approaches to green building that prioritized both environmental impact and community development. "We've been looking for someone with your expertise in municipal planning," Emily mentioned during our second meeting, "someone who understands both the technical requirements and the political dynamics of large-scale sustainable development." By the end of the week, I had a job offer that included a 20% salary increase, equity participation in the firm, and the opportunity to lead their expansion into California markets. The position would allow me to work remotely for the first 6 months while establishing the Southern California office, eventually relocating to Portland when the transition was complete. I didn't accept immediately, that would have been impulsive and unprofessional, but I asked for 2 weeks to consider the opportunity and discuss it with my family. Emily understood completely and suggested I take the time I needed to make such a significant decision. Meanwhile, I had been monitoring Sebastian's activities from a distance through carefully placed digital breadcrumbs. Our shared credit card showed charges at restaurants I recognized as Andrea's favorites, florists I knew delivered to her neighborhood, and a jewelry store that specialized in custom engagement rings. The timeline was accelerating faster than I had anticipated. Sebastian wasn't just maintaining an affair, he was planning a future with Andrea that included formal commitment. The realization should have been devastating, but instead it filled me with a strange sense of liberation. When I returned from Portland on a Thursday evening, Sebastian was waiting with flowers, wine, and what appeared to be a carefully rehearsed speech about missing me and appreciating our relationship. But his performance felt hollow, mechanical, like someone going through motions while their heart was elsewhere. "How was the conference?" he asked, opening the wine with unnecessary ceremony. "Productive," I replied honestly. "I made some valuable connections and learned about some innovative approaches to sustainable development." "That's great. I'm proud of you for putting yourself out there professionally." His words were supportive, but his attention seemed divided, his phone buzzing with messages he glanced at surreptitiously throughout dinner. Over the weekend, Sebastian's behavior became increasingly erratic. He would suggest activities together, then seemed distracted and impatient when we were actually spending time. He started conversations about our future plans, then would trail off or change subjects abruptly when I engaged enthusiastically with his ideas. On Sunday afternoon, while Sebastian was taking one of his mysterious phone calls in the backyard, I decided to test my suspicions more directly. I called Andrea, something I hadn't done since discovering the affair 3 weeks earlier. "Meredith." She sounded startled, almost panicked. "Hi, how was Portland?" "Amazing," I said. "I actually have some exciting news to share. Do you want to get dinner this week?" "Oh, I'd love to, but this week is crazy with work. Maybe next week?" "Of course. Actually, I was thinking we could make it a group dinner. You, me, Sebastian, maybe Hans if he's free." Hans Berkeley was Andrea's brother, who lived across the country and hadn't visited in over a year. "Hans isn't in town," Andrea said quickly, "and Sebastian mentioned he's really busy with that international project this week." The slip was revealing. When had Sebastian mentioned his schedule to Andrea? According to both of them, they rarely communicated directly, yet she seemed to have detailed knowledge of his work commitments. "That's fine," I said casually. "We can wait until things calm down for everyone." After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen processing the conversation. Andrea and Sebastian were clearly coordinating their schedules and their stories, but they were becoming sloppy about maintaining consistent lies. The pressure of managing multiple deceptions was beginning to show. That evening, Sebastian announced he would be traveling for business the following week, meetings in San Francisco that could extend through the weekend if negotiations became complicated. "It's terrible timing," he said, his concern seeming genuine. "I know you just got back from your trip, and I hate leaving you again so soon." "It's fine," I assured him. "Work is work. Besides, it gives me time to catch up on my own projects without feeling guilty about ignoring you." He looked relieved, probably anticipating an extended period with Andrea, without the stress of maintaining his cover story. But what Sebastian didn't know was that I had no intention of spending that week alone in our house, wondering what they were doing together. I had a much more interesting plan in mind, one that would give me definitive answers about the scope of their betrayal, while positioning me to take control of the situation entirely. By the time Sebastian returned from his fake business trip, the dynamic between us would have shifted permanently, and he would finally understand exactly who he had been underestimating all along. Sebastian left for his fabricated San Francisco business trip on Tuesday morning, with an elaborate display of reluctance that might have been convincing if I hadn't known the truth. He packed carefully, kissing me goodbye with what felt like performance affection, and promised to call every evening to check in. "I'll miss you," he said, holding me just a moment longer than usual, probably practicing for the emotional conversations he anticipated having with Andrea about their guilt over deceiving me. "Miss you too," I replied, meaning it in a way he couldn't possibly understand. I would miss the Sebastian I had thought I married, the man I had built a life with before discovering he was largely fictional. Within an hour of his departure, I had implemented a surveillance plan that would have impressed any private investigator. I wasn't interested in dramatic confrontations or emotional revelations. I needed concrete evidence and comprehensive documentation of what I was dealing with. First, I installed discrete security cameras around our house, focusing on entry points and common areas. If Sebastian returned unexpectedly, or brought Andrea to our home while I was supposedly unaware of their relationship, I would have video evidence of the violation of our shared space. Next, I activated location tracking on Sebastian's phone through our shared family plan, a feature we had enabled years earlier for safety purposes but had never actually used. The technology that had been intended to help us find each other in emergencies was now revealing the truth about where Sebastian spent his time when he claimed to be working. But the most sophisticated part of my surveillance operation involved Andrea's house. Using my architectural expertise and some equipment borrowed from construction sites, I positioned wireless cameras with clear views of her driveway and front entrance. I wasn't invading her privacy inside the house, but I could monitor who came and went when Sebastian's car appeared and how long he stayed. The first night of Sebastian's supposed business trip, his BMW appeared in Andrea's driveway at 6:30 p.m. and remained there until 8 a.m. the following morning. His location tracking confirmed he had never left the city, much less traveled to San Francisco for meetings. Wednesday evening brought the same pattern, Sebastian's car arriving at Andrea's house directly from his actual office, staying overnight, leaving the following morning as if he were returning from a hotel to prepare for another day of business meetings. But it was Thursday night that provided the most revealing footage. Instead of Sebastian's BMW, a black sedan I didn't recognize pulled into Andrea's driveway. Through the camera's telephoto lens, I watched Sebastian emerge from the passenger seat, followed by Andrea from the driver's side. They were returning from somewhere together, walking hand in hand toward her front door with the casual intimacy of an established couple. As they approached the house, I could hear fragments of their conversation through the wireless audio equipment I had positioned near the entrance. "Told my mother about us," Andrea was saying. "She wants to meet you properly, not just as Meredith's husband." "What did you tell her?" Sebastian's voice was warm, engaged in a way I hadn't heard directed toward me in months. "That we're waiting until everything is finalized before making it official. She understands the situation is complicated." "It won't be complicated much longer," Sebastian replied. "The attorney says the paperwork should be processed within 6 weeks, maybe sooner if Meredith doesn't contest anything." They paused at the front door, Sebastian pulling Andrea close for a kiss that was tender and passionate, the kind of spontaneous affection that had disappeared from our marriage, so gradually I hadn't noticed its absence until seeing its presence in his relationship with someone else. I love you, Andrea said softly. I love you too, Sebastian replied without hesitation. I can't wait until we don't have to hide anymore. I sat in my car across the street, watching through binoculars and listening through wireless earbuds as my husband and best friend discussed their future together with the casual confidence of people who believed they had successfully deceived me. They were making plans, introducing each other to family members, counting down the days until they could be publicly together. The most painful part wasn't their obvious happiness, it was the realization that Sebastian was capable of the kind of spontaneous affection and emotional availability he had been withholding from our marriage. He hadn't lost the ability to be romantic, passionate, or emotionally present. He had simply redirected those qualities towards someone else while giving me the diminished version of himself that remained. But the surveillance operation also revealed something else. They were both completely confident in their ability to manage this situation. They believed they understood my emotional responses, my likely reactions, my capacity for moving forward independently. They had discussed me like a problem to be solved rather than a person whose life they were destroying, calculating my probable responses with the detached analysis of people planning a business transaction. That clinical approach to my heartbreak was the detail that finally ignited my anger, not the affair itself, but their presumption that they could predict and control my reactions to their betrayal. By Friday morning, when Sebastian called to update me on his fictional business meetings, I had comprehensive documentation of his actual activities and a clear understanding of how they viewed both me and the situation they had created. "How are the negotiations going?" I asked, listening to him lie fluently about meetings that had never happened while I looked at photos of him leaving Andrea's house that morning. "Challenging but productive," he replied. "I think we'll wrap up by Saturday, maybe Sunday at the latest." "Take your time," I said generously. "I know how important this project is for your career." Let him think I was still the supportive, understanding wife who prioritized his professional success over my own emotional needs. Very soon he would discover exactly how wrong he had been about who I really was. Friday evening brought the most revealing surveillance footage yet. Sebastian's car arrived at Andrea's house earlier than usual, followed 20 minutes later by a catering truck from Bella Vista, the upscale Italian restaurant where Sebastian and I had celebrated our third wedding anniversary. Through the camera's lens, I watched delivery staff carry elegant food containers and what appeared to be champagne into the house. They were celebrating something. I positioned myself across the street with enhanced audio equipment, close enough to catch fragments of conversation when they stepped onto Andrea's back patio for what seemed to be a private toast. "Can't believe it's finally happening." Andrea's voice carried across the quiet evening air. "I know it's been hard, keeping everything secret, but it's almost over," Sebastian replied. "The attorney confirmed the paperwork will be processed by the end of next week. And you're sure she won't contest it? Meredith can be stubborn when she wants to be." Sebastian's laugh had a cold edge I had never heard before. "She won't fight it. Meredith avoids confrontation, especially about personal stuff. She'll probably be relieved to focus on work without having to pretend we're happy." The casual dismissal of my emotional capacity was breathtaking. After 7 years of marriage, Sebastian had reduced me to a collection of predictable responses and assumed limitations. He was so confident in his assessment of my character that he had based his entire strategy on the belief that I would accept betrayal passively rather than fight for what was mine. "Still," Andrea said, "I feel guilty about the timing, right after her big conference success and everything." "The timing was never going to be perfect," Sebastian replied, echoing the same words I had heard weeks earlier through Andrea's window. "Besides, she'll land on her feet. She always does. Meredith is tougher than she looks." They clinked glasses, toasting what appeared to be the imminent end of my marriage and the beginning of their public relationship. But their celebration was premature. They were counting victories they hadn't yet achieved, assuming cooperation they hadn't secured. Saturday morning brought an unexpected development. Instead of Sebastian's usual overnight stay at Andrea's house, both their cars left early and didn't return until late afternoon. The location tracking on Sebastian's phone showed they had driven to Monterey, probably extending their celebration with a romantic weekend getaway. While they were gone, I implemented the final phase of my surveillance operation. Using my architectural access credentials, I conducted what I thought of as a structural assessment of their relationship. examining the foundation they had built their betrayal on and identifying its weakest points. I visited Andrea's house while she was away, not to break in or steal anything, but to observe the evidence of their relationship that they couldn't hide. The spare key she kept under the fake rock by her front steps hadn't moved, a detail that confirmed my suspicion that Sebastian had his own key, suggesting a level of domestic intimacy that went far beyond casual affair. Through the windows, I could see changes to her living space that indicated Sebastian's presence: men's clothing hanging in her bedroom, a second coffee mug on the nightstand, toiletries in the bathroom that definitely weren't hers. This wasn't a secret affair conducted in hotel rooms and stolen moments. It was a full domestic partnership that existed parallel to my marriage. Most revealing was the mail I could see stacked on her kitchen counter. Mixed in with Andrea's usual correspondence was what appeared to be credit card statements and bank documents addressed to Sebastian at her address. He had been using Andrea's house as a mailing address for financial accounts I knew nothing about, suggesting their relationship included financial planning and asset management that extended far beyond emotional infidelity. When Sebastian returned from Monterey Sunday evening, his cover story was elaborate and detailed. The fictional business meetings had been extremely productive, requiring extended negotiations that had fortunately concluded with favorable terms for his firm. He was tired but satisfied, looking forward to getting back to normal routines now that this major project was completed. "I missed you," he said, embracing me with what felt like genuine warmth. Perhaps he had missed me, in the way someone misses familiar comfort while pursuing exciting new experiences. "I missed you too," I replied honestly. I had missed the Sebastian I thought I knew, the husband I had believed was committed to our marriage, the partner I had trusted with my future. "How was your week?" he asked. "You seem different somehow." "More relaxed maybe." The observation was accurate, but for reasons Sebastian couldn't imagine. I did feel more relaxed, the clarity that comes from finally understanding a situation completely, the peace that follows the end of uncertainty and doubt. "I've been thinking about some changes," I said carefully. "Professional opportunities, new directions for my career." "That sounds exciting," Sebastian replied, probably assuming I was referring to consulting work or conference speaking, developments that would support his timeline by keeping me busy and distracted during the divorce proceedings. "It is exciting," I agreed. "I think you'll be surprised by what I've been planning." Sebastian smiled, kissing my forehead with affection that felt genuine despite its foundation of deception. He thought he understood what my planning entailed, probably professional advancement that would ease my transition to single life. He had no idea that my planning involved a much more comprehensive transformation than he could possibly anticipate. By the time Sebastian discovered what I had actually been preparing, it would be far too late for him to adjust his strategy or minimize the consequences of his choices. The man who had spent months orchestrating my betrayal was about to learn exactly how much he had underestimated the woman he was betraying. Monday morning arrived with Sebastian in an unusually good mood, humming while he made coffee and scrolling through his phone, with the satisfied expression of someone whose life was unfolding exactly according to plan. He mentioned that he might need to work late again that week, just tying up loose ends from the San Francisco project, but promised we could plan something special for the upcoming weekend. "Maybe we could drive up to wine country again," he suggested. "That trip to Mendocino was really nice." I agreed enthusiastically, knowing that by the weekend, our relationship would have transformed completely. But I let Sebastian maintain his timeline, his illusions of control, his confidence that he was managing this situation successfully. That afternoon, I visited my attorney, not one of the three I had consulted previously, but a specialist in high-asset divorce cases who had been recommended by a colleague. Margaret Francis was a formidable woman in her 50s who had built her practice on representing professionals whose marriages had been complicated by infidelity and financial deception. "From what you've described," Margaret said after reviewing my documentation, "your husband has been quite systematic about preparing for this divorce, while concealing his intentions from you. That level of premeditation could work in our favor." I showed her the evidence I had gathered, the surveillance footage, the financial records Sebastian had hidden, the documentation of his affair with Andrea. But I also shared something else: my own preparations, the parallel planning I had been conducting, the job offer from Portland that would give me options. Sebastian didn't know existed. You've been thorough, Margaret observed with approval. Most people in your situation are too emotionally devastated to think strategically, but I have to ask, what outcome are you hoping for? Financial settlement, custody arrangements, property division. I want him to understand that actions have consequences, I said. Sebastian has spent months planning my future without consulting me, making decisions about our marriage without my input, assuming he could predict and control my responses to his betrayal. I want him to realize exactly how wrong he was about me. Margaret smiled, the expression of someone who enjoyed her work. I think we can accomplish that. We spent the next 2 hours crafting what Margaret called a comprehensive response strategy that would address not only the legal aspects of divorce, but also the emotional and financial manipulation I had endured. The plan was elegant in its thoroughness, and devastating in its implications for Sebastian's carefully constructed timeline. That evening, while Sebastian was at Andrea's house for another work emergency, I implemented the first phase of Margaret's strategy. I prepared a series of documents that would fundamentally alter the dynamic between Sebastian and me, shifting power in ways he couldn't anticipate or control. The centerpiece was a letter that would serve as both revelation and ultimatum, a comprehensive response to months of deception that would force Sebastian to confront the full scope of what he had underestimated. Tuesday morning, I delivered the letter personally to Sebastian's office, asking his assistant to ensure he received it immediately upon arrival. I also sent copies to Andrea's office, and to both their personal email addresses, making certain they would receive my message simultaneously and understand that their secret was no longer secret. The letter read, Sebastian, by the time you read this, you will understand that your assumption about my ignorance regarding your affair with Andrea has been incorrect for several weeks. I have been aware of your relationship, your plans to divorce me, and your coordination of these betrayals since early October. I know about the divorce papers you filed without my knowledge. I know about the nights you've spent at Andrea's house while claiming to work late. I know about your trip to Monterey last weekend, while supposedly conducting business in San Francisco. I have documentation of your use of our shared financial resources to finance your relationship with my former best friend. More importantly, I know about your discussions of my anticipated responses to this situation, your confidence that I would accept betrayal passively, your assumption that I would prioritize avoiding confrontation over protecting my own interests. You have both seriously misjudged the woman you chose to deceive. I am not the passive, conflict-avoidant person you have apparently been planning around. I am an architect who has spent the past month conducting a thorough structural analysis of our marriage, your affair, and the foundation you have built your future plans on. The foundation is compromised, and the structure is about to collapse. Effective immediately, I am accepting a position with a sustainable architecture firm in Portland that includes a significant salary increase and equity participation. I will be relocating within 6 weeks. I am also filing for divorce on grounds of adultery, seeking full custody of our shared assets, and requesting that all future communications go through my attorney, Margaret Francis. You wanted to end our marriage in a way that would minimize complications for your new relationship with Andrea. Instead, you will discover that betrayal has consequences you never anticipated. Andrea will receive a copy of this letter, along with documentation of her participation in destroying our marriage, while maintaining the pretense of friendship with me. Your parents will also receive copies, as will your business partners, since your use of company resources to facilitate this affair may have professional implications. You assumed I would make this easy for you. You were wrong. You assumed I would prioritize your comfort over my own dignity. You were wrong. You assumed I had no options beyond accepting your decisions about our future. You were catastrophically wrong. The woman you have been lying to for months is not the woman who will be handling this divorce. I suggest you adjust your expectations accordingly. Meredith. By 9 a.m. Tuesday morning, both Sebastian and Andrea would have received this letter, along with selected evidence of my surveillance and documentation of their betrayal. Their carefully managed timeline would be shattered, their assumptions about my responses would be proven false, and their confidence in controlling this situation would be permanently destroyed. The woman they thought they knew was about to introduce them to someone entirely different, someone who fought back, someone who had been planning her own strategy while they believed they were managing hers. The game was about to change completely, and this time, I would be the one making the rules. The first reaction came at 9:47 a.m. Sebastian called my phone 7 times in rapid succession, his messages growing increasingly desperate with each voicemail. I didn't answer, letting each call go to voicemail while I sat in my office reviewing architectural plans for a community center project, maintaining my normal Tuesday routine as if nothing had changed. His first message was controlled, almost professional. "Meredith, we need to talk immediately. There seems to be some kind of misunderstanding." By the fourth message, his composure had cracked. "Please pick up your phone. I can explain everything. This isn't what you think it is." The seventh message revealed panic. "I'm coming to your office. We're going to sort this out right now." But Sebastian wouldn't find me at Clemens and Associates, because I had taken a personal day to handle what I knew would be a chaotic aftermath to my letter. Instead, I was working from a coffee shop downtown, monitoring the situation from a safe distance while Sebastian's world began to unravel exactly as I had planned. At 10:15 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Andrea. "How could you do this? We need to talk now." I responded calmly. All future communications should go through my attorney. Her contact information was included in the letter. Andrea's reply came immediately. "You're being ridiculous. This is between friends. We can work this out." "We haven't been friends for months," I wrote back. "You made that choice when you decided to have an affair with my husband. I'm simply acknowledging reality." The beautiful irony was that both Sebastian and Andrea were experiencing exactly what I had felt when I discovered their betrayal. The shock of having fundamental assumptions about their relationship with someone proven completely wrong. They had believed they understood me, could predict my responses, manage my emotions. Now they were discovering that the woman they thought they knew had never actually existed. By noon, the ripple effects were expanding beyond our immediate triangle. Margaret Francis called to inform me that Sebastian's attorney had contacted her office, requesting an immediate meeting to discuss resolving this misunderstanding amicably. "He seems to believe this is a negotiable situation," Margaret said with amusement. "His lawyer is talking about mediation, counseling, finding a way to preserve the dignity of all parties involved." "What did you tell them?" "That my client is not interested in preserving the dignity of people who spent months planning her humiliation. Will proceed with litigation unless they want to accept a settlement that acknowledges the full extent of their deception." I had also sent copies of my letter to Sebastian's parents, who had always treated me like the daughter they never had. His mother called that afternoon, her voice shaking with what sounded like genuine distress. "Meredith, honey, I don't understand what's happening. Sebastian says there's been some kind of terrible mistake." "There has been a mistake," I replied gently. "Sebastian and Andrea made the mistake of assuming I would accept betrayal without fighting back. They were wrong, but surely you can work this out. Marriage is about forgiveness, about working through difficulties together." Mrs. Hoff Sebastian filed for divorce without telling me while conducting an affair with my best friend. He's been planning to end our marriage for months while letting me believe we were working on our relationship. That's not a difficulty to work through. It's a fundamental betrayal of everything marriage represents. The conversation was painful because I genuinely cared about Sebastian's parents, but they needed to understand that their son's actions had consequences that extended beyond his immediate relationship with me. By 3 p.m., I received a call from my own mother, who had somehow learned about the situation, probably through Sebastian's mother, since our families had remained close throughout our marriage. "Are you sure about this, sweetheart?" Mom asked carefully. "Divorce is such a big step. Maybe couples therapy could help?" "Mom, he's been sleeping with Andrea for months while planning to divorce me behind my back. This isn't a communication problem that therapy can fix. I just want to make sure you're not making decisions while you're emotional." "This is such a shock." "I'm not emotional," I said truthfully. "I'm strategic. I've been planning my response for weeks while Sebastian thought he was managing the situation. The woman who's handling this divorce isn't the woman who was betrayed, she's someone much stronger." The most satisfying call came at 4:30 p.m., from the managing partner at Sebastian's investment firm. Apparently, Sebastian's use of company resources to facilitate his affair, including business trips that weren't business trips and client entertaining accounts used for personal relationship expenses, had raised questions about his professional conduct. We're not saying he's committed any crimes, the partner explained carefully. But there are ethical considerations when personal conduct affects professional responsibilities. We'll be conducting an internal review. Sebastian's assumption that he could compartmentalize his personal betrayals without professional consequences was proving as naive as his assumption that I would accept his behavior passively. By evening, Sebastian's carefully constructed plan for managing our divorce had collapsed completely. Instead of controlling the timeline, managing my emotional responses, and minimizing public embarrassment, he was facing professional scrutiny, family disappointment, and legal complications he hadn't anticipated. Andrea was dealing with similar consequences. Her family had been informed of her role in destroying my marriage, her professional reputation was now tied to her personal conduct, and her social circle was being forced to choose sides between us. Most importantly, both of them were learning that the woman they thought they could manipulate and deceive was actually someone who fought back with comprehensive strategy and devastating effectiveness. The old Meredith would have begged them to stay, would have tried to save a marriage that was already over. The new Meredith was showing them exactly what they had lost, and exactly why they would regret underestimating her. Wednesday morning brought an unexpected sense of peace. For the first time in months, I woke up without the underlying tension that had become my constant companion, the subconscious awareness that something was wrong in my marriage, even when I couldn't identify what it was. Now that the truth was exposed and I had taken action, I felt lighter than I had in years. I spent the morning at my current office, handling the transition details for my departure from Clemens and Associates. My supervisor, Meredith Eigenmann, was disappointed to lose me, but understanding about the circumstances that were driving my relocation. Portland's gain is definitely our loss, he said, during our exit interview. But I can't say I blame you for wanting a fresh start. Sometimes life forces us to rebuild, and it sounds like you're approaching this strategically rather than reactively. He was more right than he knew. While Sebastian and Andrea had been orchestrating my betrayal, I had been unconsciously preparing for my independence. The skills that made me successful as an architect, systematic planning, structural analysis, creative problem-solving, had served me equally well in designing my post-marriage life. My phone remained busy throughout the day, with calls from people who had learned about the divorce, but the conversations fell into predictable categories. Sebastian's friends expressed shock and offered to mediate, still believing this was a misunderstanding that could be resolved with proper communication. Andrea's colleagues were carefully neutral, probably trying to assess how her involvement would affect their own professional relationships with me. But the most interesting calls came from people who had apparently been suspecting something for months. My college roommate Emily mentioned that Sebastian had seemed different at our last social gathering, distracted and disconnected in ways that had made her wonder about our marriage. A mutual friend admitted she had seen Sebastian and Andrea together at a restaurant during a time when I was supposedly out of town for work, but hadn't wanted to create drama by mentioning it. I convinced myself it was innocent, she said apologetically. Andrea said they were planning a surprise for your birthday. I should have realized. The pattern was revealing. Sebastian and Andrea had been sloppy enough that other people had noticed their relationship, but they had been skillful enough at providing alternative explanations that most observers had accepted their cover stories rather than confront uncomfortable truths. Thursday brought the first direct attempt at contact since my letter. Sebastian appeared at my office building during lunch, waiting in the lobby until I returned from a client meeting. He looked terrible, unshaven, exhausted, wearing the same clothes I had seen him in the previous day through surveillance footage. "Meredith, please," he said, approaching me as I tried to walk past him toward the elevators. "Just give me 5 minutes to explain." "Everything that needs to be explained is in the divorce papers," I replied calmly. "Your attorney has my attorney's contact information. This isn't about legal proceedings, this is about 7 years of marriage, 7 years of history together. That has to count for something." I stopped walking and looked at Sebastian directly for the first time since discovering his affair. He appeared genuinely distressed, but I couldn't tell if his emotions were about losing me or about losing control of the situation he had thought he was managing. "You're right," I said. 7 years should count for something. It should have counted for honesty about your feelings, respect for my right to make informed decisions about my future, and basic consideration for the vows we made to each other. Since you decided none of that mattered, I'm not sure why you think our history obligates me to make this easy for you now. I never meant to hurt you, Sebastian said quietly. I know that sounds ridiculous given everything that's happened, but I was trying to find a way to end things that would be least painful for everyone. Sebastian, you filed for divorce without telling me while conducting an affair with my best friend. You spent months planning to destroy my life while letting me believe we were working on our marriage. If that was your idea of minimizing pain, I'm curious what your version of maximum cruelty would look like. He flinched at the directness of my response, probably expecting more emotional volatility and less analytical precision. I just want to know if there's any possibility of working this out, he said desperately. Any chance we could go to counseling, try to rebuild what we had? The question revealed how completely he still misunderstood the situation. Sebastian was asking if I wanted to repair a relationship with someone who had proven himself capable of elaborate, sustained deception. He was suggesting we rebuild a foundation that had been compromised from the beginning. Sebastian, I'm an architect, I said patiently. When a building's foundation is compromised, you don't try to patch it and hope for the best. You demolish the structure and build something new on solid ground. That's what I'm doing, and there's no room in your new construction for anything we built together. I considered his question seriously, looking at this man I had loved and trusted and shared 7 years with. There was sadness in letting go of what we had been, but there was also relief in finally understanding what we had never been. The woman you married would have tried to save this marriage, I said finally. She would have begged you to choose her over Andrea, would have blamed herself for not being enough to keep you happy. But that woman was operating on incomplete information. She didn't know she was married to someone capable of this level of betrayal. And the woman standing here now has better options. I walked into the elevator, leaving Sebastian in the lobby with the realization that the person he had thought he could manage and manipulate had evolved into someone he didn't recognize, someone stronger, more independent, and completely beyond his influence. The old Meredith had needed Sebastian's approval, his affection, his partnership to feel complete. The new Meredith was building a life that was entirely her own, and it was going to be beautiful. Friday evening brought the confrontation I had been anticipating. Sebastian and Andrea arrived at my house together, a bold choice that revealed either desperation or a complete misunderstanding of how thoroughly the power dynamic had shifted. I watched through my security cameras as they approached my front door, Sebastian's posture tense with determination, while Andrea hung back slightly, clearly uncomfortable with this direct approach. When I opened the door, they both looked worse than I had expected. Sebastian appeared haggard, his usual polished appearance replaced by the disheveled look of someone under extreme stress. Andrea seemed diminished somehow, her characteristic confidence replaced by obvious anxiety. We need to talk, Sebastian said, without preamble. All three of us, like adults. About what? I asked, genuinely curious about their strategy for this conversation. About finding a way to move forward that doesn't destroy everyone involved, Andrea said, speaking for the first time. This has gotten completely out of hand. I stepped aside to let them enter, more interested in observing their approach than in avoiding the confrontation. They moved into my living room, our living room, technically, though Sebastian would be relinquishing his claims soon enough, with the careful positioning of people preparing for negotiation. Meredith, Sebastian began. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. What happened between Andrea and me, it wasn't planned. It just evolved over time, and by the time we realized how serious it had become, we were in too deep to handle it well. So your solution was to file for divorce behind my back while conducting an affair for months? I asked calmly. We were trying to find a way to minimize the damage, Andrea interjected. We knew this would hurt you no matter how it happened, so we thought if we could present it as a mutual decision, it would be easier for everyone. The revised narrative was fascinating. They were reframing months of systematic deception as misguided attempt to protect my feelings, essentially asking me to accept that their betrayal had been motivated by consideration for my emotional well-being. Let me understand this correctly, I said, settling into the armchair that had become my favorite spot for morning coffee. You decided that the kindest way to end my marriage was to lie to me for months while making plans behind my back, then present me with divorce papers as a fait accompli. When you put it like that, It sounds terrible, Sebastian admitted. But we were trying to avoid exactly this kind of confrontation, this level of conflict and pain. Sebastian, this confrontation exists because you spent months treating me like an obstacle to be managed rather than a person whose feelings and choices mattered. You created this conflict by assuming you had the right to make decisions about my future without my input. Andrea shifted uncomfortably. We never meant for it to happen this way. The feelings between Sebastian and me, they caught us both by surprise. We tried to fight them, but stop, I interrupted. I'm not interested in hearing about your romantic journey. I'm interested in understanding why you thought I would cooperate with your plan to minimize consequences for yourselves, while maximizing disruption to my life. What do you want from us? Sebastian asked bluntly. Financial settlement? Public apology? What would it take for you to handle this divorce quietly, without involving our families and colleagues? The question revealed everything about how they still viewed this situation. Sebastian was treating our confrontation like a business negotiation, assuming I had a price that would buy my cooperation with their preferred narrative. I want you to understand that actions have consequences, I said simply. You made choices based on the assumption that I would prioritize your comfort over my own dignity. You were wrong, but surely we can find some middle ground, Andrea pleaded. Some way to move forward that doesn't hurt everyone involved. I looked at these two people who had shared intimate conversations about my predictable responses, who had planned my emotional reactions like variables in an equation they were solving. They still believed this was a problem that could be managed through the right combination of explanation and negotiation. The middle ground was honesty, I said. That option expired when you chose deception instead. Now you get to live with the consequences of that choice. The realization was dawning on both their faces. The woman they had betrayed was not the woman they would be dealing with moving forward, and she was not interested in making their lives easier. The silence that followed my declaration stretched uncomfortably as Sebastian and Andrea processed the reality that their assumptions about my cooperation had been fundamentally wrong. I could see them exchanging glances, silently recalibrating their approach as the full scope of their miscalculation became clear. Meredith, Sebastian said finally, his voice taking on the persuasive tone he used in business negotiations. I understand you're hurt and angry, but think about what you're doing. This scorched earth approach isn't going to bring you any satisfaction. It's just going to make everyone miserable. Everyone is already miserable, I replied. The difference is that now the misery is distributed more equitably. Andrea leaned forward, trying a different approach. We know we handled this badly. We know we hurt you, but continuing this war isn't going to undo what happened. At some point, we all have to move forward. You're absolutely right, I agreed. We do all have to move forward. The question is whether you'll do it with dignity, or whether you'll continue trying to manipulate the situation to minimize consequences for yourselves. What do you mean? Sebastian asked warily. I stood up, walking to my desk where I had prepared 3 envelopes for this exact conversation. I mean, I'm giving you a choice. The same kind of choice you gave me when you filed divorce papers without my knowledge. I handed each of them an envelope. Option 1 is in the blue envelope. You can continue fighting this divorce, claiming it's a misunderstanding, trying to salvage your reputations by portraying me as an unstable woman who overreacted to normal marital problems. If you choose this path, I will ensure that every detail of your affair becomes public record. Every lie you told, every deception you orchestrated, every moment you violated my trust will be documented in court proceedings that your colleagues, families, and professional networks will witness. Sebastian's face had gone pale as he opened the blue envelope and scanned the comprehensive timeline of evidence I had compiled. Option 2, I continued, handing Andrea the green envelope, is cooperation. You acknowledge publicly that you conducted an affair that violated my marriage and my friendship. You accept responsibility for your choices without trying to minimize their impact or reframe them as mistakes of the heart. In exchange, I handle the divorce proceedings with discretion that protects your privacy while ensuring I receive fair compensation for the emotional and financial damage you've caused. Andrea's hands were shaking as she read through the detailed settlement proposal that would require her to make financial restitution for her role in destroying my marriage. And option 3, Sebastian asked, though his voice suggested he wasn't sure he wanted to know. Option 3 is in the red envelope, I said, retrieving the final document from my desk. Complete capitulation. You accept my terms for the divorce settlement without negotiation. You provide written apologies to our families explaining your behavior. You resign from any social organizations or professional groups where we might have overlapping contact. Essentially, you disappear from my life completely and allow me to rebuild without any continued interference from either of you. Sebastian opened the red envelope, his face cycling through shock, anger, and resignation as he absorbed the comprehensive nature of what complete capitulation would require. This is extortion, he said, finally. This is consequences, I corrected. You spent months making unilateral decisions about my future. Now I'm making unilateral decisions about yours. You can't seriously expect us to agree to any of these options, Andrea protested. They're all punitive, designed to humiliate us rather than resolve the situation. Then choose option 1, I said calmly. Fight me in court, try to control the narrative, attempt to minimize your accountability. But understand that if you make that choice, I will ensure the world knows exactly who you both really are. I walked back to my chair, settling in comfortably as they processed their options. You have 48 hours to decide. After that, I proceed with option 1 by default, and you lose any influence over how the situation unfolds. This isn't fair, Sebastian said, desperately. You're asking us to choose between bad and worse. I'm giving you the same consideration you gave me, I replied. None. The woman they had betrayed was offering them more choice than they had offered her. But they were finally beginning to understand that the choices came with consequences they could no longer control or manipulate. For the first time since this began, I held all the power. And I intended to use it. Saturday morning, exactly 47 hours after my ultimatum, Sebastian called Margaret Francis's office to inform her that he and Andrea would be accepting option 2, cooperation with public acknowledgement of their affair, and acceptance of the settlement terms I had outlined. The decision surprised me slightly. I had expected Sebastian's pride to drive him toward the more combative option 1, but apparently the comprehensive evidence I had compiled made the prospect of public litigation too risky for both their professional reputations. Margaret called me with the news while I was packing boxes in my home office, preparing for my move to Portland. They've agreed to your terms almost entirely, she reported with satisfaction. A few minor modifications to the timeline, but nothing that affects the substance of what you wanted. And the public acknowledgements, Sebastian will issue a statement to both families explaining that the divorce resulted from his affair and poor decision-making. Andrea will do the same, including a formal apology to you for violating your friendship. Both statements will acknowledge that you handled the situation with more grace than they deserved. The settlement exceeded my expectations in every meaningful way. I would retain full ownership of our house, receive a substantial financial settlement that reflected both the emotional damage and the economic disruption their betrayal had caused, and most importantly, I would be free to move forward without any continued entanglement with either of them. 2 weeks later, I watched from my car as the moving truck loaded the last of my belongings for the drive to Portland. The house looked smaller somehow, less significant than it had when it contained the dreams and plans Sebastian and I had shared. But it also looked peaceful, ready for its next chapter as someone else's home. Emily Clemens had been true to her word about the position in Portland. My new firm specialized in exactly the kind of innovative, sustainable design that had always excited me most, and my first project was a mixed-use development that would serve as a model for affordable housing initiatives throughout the Pacific Northwest. More importantly, Portland felt like a place where I could build the life I had always wanted, but had somehow never prioritized during my marriage. I found a craftsman bungalow in a walkable neighborhood, filled with other professionals who valued environmental responsibility and community engagement. I joined a hiking group, started taking pottery classes, and began developing friendships with people who knew me only as Meredith the architect, not Meredith the divorced woman, or Meredith the betrayed wife. 6 months after moving to Portland, I received a wedding invitation that made me laugh out loud. Sebastian and Andrea were getting married in a small ceremony in Napa Valley, probably the same location where Sebastian and I had planned to buy a vacation home. I threw the invitation away without a second thought. A year later, my sustainable housing project won a regional design award and was featured in Architectural Record as an example of how environmental responsibility could be integrated with affordable community development. The article included a photo of me standing in front of the completed building, and I was struck by how genuinely happy I looked, not the performed happiness of social media or professional headshots, but the authentic contentment of someone living exactly the life she had chosen. I never saw Sebastian or Andrea again, though I occasionally heard updates through mutual acquaintances. Their marriage had been shorter than our divorce proceedings, ending when Andrea discovered Sebastian having an affair with a colleague from his investment firm. Apparently, the man who had been capable of sustained deception during our marriage had simply applied those same skills to his next relationship. The irony was perfect, though I felt no satisfaction in their misfortune. By the time I learned about their divorce, they had become characters in someone else's story, people I had once known who were no longer relevant to the life I was building. Today, 3 years after that Thursday afternoon when I discovered Sebastian's car in Andrea's driveway, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. I run my own sustainable architecture consulting firm. I'm in a relationship with a marine biologist who shares my values and treats me with genuine respect, and I wake up every morning excited about the projects and possibilities ahead of me. The woman who stood listening through Andrea's window as her husband and best friend discussed their betrayal feels like someone I knew long ago, someone I'm grateful to have been, because her pain led to my strength, but someone I no longer need to be. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't getting revenge or proving a point. Sometimes it's simply building a life so authentic and fulfilling that you forget why you were angry in the first place. The old Meredith fought for a marriage that was already over. The new Meredith built something so much better than what she lost that she couldn't imagine wanting the old life back. And that, I realized, was the most beautiful victory of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.